Hello everyone, welcome to Wonders Weird and Wild. Today's episode is on the Principality of Sealand. As always, if you have any topics that you would like to recommend for future videos, please drop them in the comments and I'm going to see what I can do about making videos about those. Anyhow, on with today's topic. During World War II, in 1942 specifically, Great Britain created sea forts mounted on concrete posts in the middle of the British Channel to defend against the Nazis. In 1956, they abandoned these forts because naturally, nobody needed to defend from the Nazis anymore. The Nazis had gone out of Germany, there was no more World War II. After this point, those forts were taken over by what we can only call pirates. But not the usual type of pirates you would think of, not the swashbuckling, scurvy dog type pirates that sail the seven seas. No, we're talking about radio pirates. So, in the 1950s and 60s, British airwaves were largely controlled by the BBC, meaning that naturally, you had people running pirate radio stations in attempts to play music, make money off of it, that kind of thing. Roy Bates had already attempted to set up one of these pirated radio stations on a sea fort, but it didn't work out quite so well as the British government evicted him as it was in British waters. This brings us to the idea of Ruff's Tower. Ruff's Tower was a sea fort built by the British for World War II. However, the unique thing about Ruff's Tower is that it was not within British waters. It was in international waters, which is an entirely separate set of laws and regulations. So, sitting in national waters in 1967, Roy Bates set up one of these radio stations on Ruff's Tower. Because it was in international waters, British law had no real jurisdiction over what occurred at Ruff's Tower or this fort in general, this region, anything in that area. So what Roy Bates did from here was he declared this fort as its own sovereign nation, known as the Principality of Sealand. Because of the lack of population on Sealand and the lack of its services and civilian life, most nations don't recognize it as its own sovereign state. However, it does have much of what most nations do have. It has basic medical care, it has prisons, it has food, that kind of thing, which validates the argument to a certain extent that it is its own sovereign nation. So, Roy Bates set up this nation, established a constitution, gave it a national anthem called E Mare Libertas, or From the Sea, Freedom. Though the British do not acknowledge Sealand as its own individual sovereign nation, declassified documents absolutely reveal that they recognized Sealand as a concern, and though they were tabled, they had plans to take Sealand back by force via bombs. To add to this, Michael Bates, the Prince of Sealand at the time, in 1968, fired a warning shot at a crew of maintenance personnel working on a buoy nearby because they were infringing on Sealand territory. This got them involved with British law. However, British legal forces made the ruling that they could not decide on a case that did not occur in Great Britain itself. Roy Bates took this as a de facto recognition of the independence of the nation of Sealand. So naturally, what the British chose to do was they chose to extend their naval jurisdiction, their national waters, out 12 nautical miles from their current position. Sealand responded by doing the same, expanding their naval territory 12 nautical miles out from the fort itself. And here things start to get a little bit funky. So, in the 1970s, a German businessman came to Roy Bates. His name was Alexander Achenbach. What he proposed was an expansion of entertainment and such on Sealand, talking about things like casinos, theaters, that kind of thing. So, what Roy Bates ended up doing was he ended up acknowledging Alexander Achenbach as his foreign minister. As foreign minister, Alexander Achenbach attempted negotiations with other nations for the recognition of the Principality of Sealand as its own sovereign state. These negotiations were unsuccessful, however, as no nation changed their previous stance and stood on their previous reasoning. Still desiring power over Sealand, Alexander Achenbach in 1978 hired a group of Dutch and German mercenaries to stage a coup against the current ruling government, being King Roy Bates. They kept him in the brig for several days before shipping him off to the Netherlands and a fishing trawler that was passing by. Several days later, Roy Bates came back with a helicopter full of his own armed guards and took this nation of Sealand back as his own. There has been no change in regime in the nation of Sealand since, beyond the passing of the title of king from Roy Bates to Michael Bates. Most of the income from the nation of Sealand comes from the sellings of things such as passports, website domains, and royal titles. Actually, during the 1997 investigation of the murder of Gianni Versace, the murderer was found to have come into the nation using a falsified Sealand passport. But one of the ways that Sealand currently runs is that you can purchase both website domains and you can purchase royal titles. For instance, being a knight of Sealand costs about $150. Today, Sealand is still in full operation, with King Michael Bates currently being the ruling power of the nation. Thank you all for listening. As always, if you have any suggestions for future videos, please drop them in the comments, and have a nice day.